When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Ali Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of the Insatiable podcast, your period, the pill, and nutritional fixes with Nicole Jardim, certified women's health and functional nutrition coach. Today's episode was a blast. We kind of went off the rails with period stories and women march signs that got Nicole a lot of backlash. But I think you're really going to love today's episode because in concert with the theme of this season, the feminine perspective, we don't get a lot of information about our periods. What are they doing? What actually happens when we go on the pill? Why do doctors think it's a silver bullet? And how does it actually set us up for a lot of health problems down the road, including for some women, they're not attracted to their same partners anymore. And Nicole's going to get into the research about that. We also talk a lot about nutritional changes that need to happen as you cycle through your period and just a lot of other fun facts. And they're not just fun, they're profound so that you can have more independent choice or agency over what you decide to do with your body. So you're really, really going to enjoy today's episode. If the lady parts conversation seems to be kind of a mystery, which it definitely was for me for a really long time. Yet, as Nicole talks about, your period is the fifth vital sign, meaning it really is a sign and symptom of your overall health. A little bit more about her. Nicole is a certified women's health coach, and she is the creator of a Fix Your Period, a series of programs that empower women to reclaim their hormonal health using a method that combines simplicity and sass. She's also the co-host of The Period Party, a top-rated podcast on iTunes. Nicole has also studied with visionaries in the field like Dr. Sarah Gottfried, Chris Kresser, and Jessica Drummond, founder of the Integrative Women's Health Institute. You are going to love today's episode. Enjoy it, and we'll see you on the flip side. Also, remember, this is the sign-up period coming up for Truce with Food 2018. Registration opens January 22nd, and the week before, starting January 15th, you can get a free intro to my annual flagship program at alishapiro.com. So I know a lot of you have been listening and have emailed me that you're interested. Now's the time to get on board. So again, you can sign up at alishapiro.com. But first, enjoy today's really funny and really insightful episode. Nicole, aka the Period Girl, thank you so much for being here today. This year, I have found a lot of my clients getting off birth control, a lot wanting to get off, a lot of us working on their period issues. So I'm so glad to have you here as an expert on the topic.
Thanks, Ali. I'm really thrilled to be here with you. This is going to be so much fun.
Yeah. So before we get into why you were called the Period Girl, I want to ask you what your earliest memories are of when you first got your period.
I just think that it was all just meant to be because I distinctly remember I was 12 when it happened, and probably in the weeks leading up to it, I knew it was coming. I didn't really have any other understanding for the most part of like what was going on, but I just had this gut feeling. And so I had like my mom had bought me pads, like a box of pads. And you remember pads back in the day, they were no joke. They were like really thick and not cute at all.
Because probably only men were designing them at that time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Don't even get me started on that. We'll get there though. And so I remember I had these in my backpack and one of my friends found them and she was like, "Do you have your period? You didn't tell me?" So it just turned into this big dramatic thing. As you can imagine, it's so mortifying at that age. So I had them in my backpack. And then the day that I got my period, I wore a panty liner to school because I don't know how I knew, but I just knew. Anyway, got my period. at school that day. Got into the car, and when my mom picked me up, and I was like, I got my period today. And I remember distinctly saying it with a little bit of excitement, but also being completely mortified. And she was thrilled, which I think was really critical in how I ended up viewing my period overall. But yeah, she was just so excited about it. And she took me out to lunch and we had a great time. Anyway, that was a main memory I have of it, and then it started to go downhill from there, but we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, the difference between like your mom's reaction and yours, because I had a similar experience so I actually had cancer when I was 13 and went through chemo and then got my period at 14. And it was like a very important medical milestone to know that like my fertility hadn't been compromised. But I remember going downstairs and being like, Mom, I got my period, and feeling like mortified like you did. And my mom being like so excited. And she's like, this is so exciting. And I was almost like mortified that she was so excited.
Yes, like insert eye roll.
Yeah. And then I remember my dad was a health and phys ed teacher, and he would get like tampons sent to him because he wasn't the girls' health teacher. But I just remember a couple weeks later, like in the bathroom, there was just like this box of tampons with like no note, nothing, just like clearly my dad did not want to have the conversation, and I knew where they came from, and like we just didn't talk about it. It was like
that is so funny. But we didn't talk about it back then, did we? I mean, every single woman I've talked to who is in our age range, like 30s and 40s, their moms or definitely not their dads, but their moms like maybe gave them a book or, like maybe said, like checked in and saw how they were doing if they had gotten their period, but there was no real conversation about it. And that's a huge problem, I think.
Well, and that's one of the things I really wanted to have you on, and what I just so admired about, like, as I was doing research, like, who do I want to bring on to talk about this? And your Instagram feed is just like uteruses and vulvas and periods. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't realize how uncomfortable I still was with this until you were normalizing it for me on your feed. And I was like, I got some work to do around this issue. I mean, I feel totally comfortable the more I've been following you, but I was like, wow, why do we feel that? Like initial like shame or like, oh my God, rather than celebrating it, I'm
Yeah.
sure you have some ideas. I love that, that you went to the Women's March and you were like, why are the Republicans obsessed with my uterus? I was like, yes, that's such a great sign.
Girl, I got so much backlash for that sign. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Really?
I mean,
What
yeah,
backlash?
I did.
I
Well,
know we're going off topic, but now I'm fascinated.
I know we are a little, but that's okay. I'll make it quick. But basically, in my Facebook group, I have a free Facebook group. There's probably about 4,000 women in there. They just come from my blog and my newsletter and whatnot. And they want to know about their hormones and how to balance them naturally and whatnot. And they come from all walks of life. And I posted that image because I was super psyched that we had gone to this march and that there were so many people, men, women, everyone, every gender, there to support something that I fundamentally believe in. And there were so many women who attacked me in my group. I couldn't believe it. It was out of control. So I had to take the post down. I had to delete a bunch of people from the group because they were so aggressive. And it was just really disappointing, unfortunately, because it totally took the wind out of my sails.
Yeah, well, this podcast since the 2016 election has gotten a lot more political, and you're in good company here because people are like, I love it, keep going. I'm sure some people have tuned out, but there's more, I think, people who want to have agency over their body and what that means. So,
I totally agree with you. And I was just going to say, like Republicans say all the time that there's no war on women. And people are buying that 100%. Their supporters buy that. But it's just, it's just not the truth. It drives me crazy.
I know. And yes, I totally agree. I mean, I always say like I'm an independent because the Democrats piss me off in many ways too. And
well, yes, same here.
But when it comes to women's issues, I mean, it's become so far right that the center has moved, unfortunately. So
yes. Anyways, yes.
Yeah. So back to our periods and claiming that we can talk about them out in the open. So you had that experience and then you started to have period issues. And what happened with yours, but also what are some signs that are actually unrelated to our periods that we're having period/hormonal issues? I'd love to hear you talk about that.
For sure. I should preface all of this by saying that my dad died suddenly when I was 11, and that was actually right before my period. So there was a lot of trauma, I suppose you could say, a lot of emotional and trauma at a really young age. And trauma can be really impactful on our endocrine system, how our bodies develop, because everything's connected. connected, right? Our hormones are all talking to each other all day long. So what happened is my period came that first time when I was 12, and it continued to come. But then around 14 or 15, it started to be more spread out. So suddenly I was getting a period every 3, maybe 4 months. And, I distinctly remember feeling so bloated. And I was like, what is going on here? And then I realized, I haven't had my period for like 3 months. This is a problem. And then when it finally come, it was so heavy. And I would miss school because I was really sick. I would get these cramps that would make me throw up or want to throw up. And then it was so heavy that I just was terrified to go to school and like leak through my underwear into my school uniform. You remember those days? Like that was literally the worst fear of anyone's life.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly.
That and boys snapping your bra.
Oh yeah. Well, I went to an all girls school, so nobody was doing that. But yes, that would be really traumatizing too, I imagine. And so ultimately I went on the pill because my gynecologist at the time said, well, we're going to have to regulate your cycle, quote unquote, regulate your cycle, because it's not coming the way it's supposed to. And we want to make sure that it does that. It's not coming, meaning your period's not coming. So I thought, okay, great. That sounds good. I was excited because everyone else was on the pill, all the cool girls. And I wanted to be on the pill too, even though I wasn't even having sex at the time. So I just thought, well, I'm now part of this crew. So went on the pill, and that sort of swung my hormones in a complete opposite direction. So suddenly I went from, having these really heavy, painful periods that were very irregular to having very light periods. Almost got to the point where it was just spotting. And then my hair started to fall out. And then I started to get melasma on my face. And my sex drive dropped dramatically. And then sex became painful. And this went on and on. So all of these symptoms started to crop up, and I had no idea what was going on. And finally I saw an acupuncturist, and he was the person who told me that it was probably the birth control pill. Nobody had said anything about that. I had seen probably like 15 doctors at that point for all kinds of issues, like my gynecologist because of my low sex drive and like painful sex and what was happening there. And then I saw a gastroenterologist because I had horrible gut health issues, which I'll describe as a side effect of using the pill. And, the list goes on, and the dermatologist for my skin, So ultimately I really had no answers, and I needed to figure out what was going on with my health from a deeper level. But when it comes to symptoms that aren't related to your period, there's so many things. I think that one of the biggest issues I encounter with clients and with women who come to me generally is some kind of gut distress or digestive problem. And what happens is it's like a chicken or an egg thing. This is usually what comes first, though, is that the gut health issues start, and then the hormones get out of whack because of that. Because when your gut isn't functioning optimally, as you know, all kinds of things happen. It's like a cascade effect. So that's what really I think is a big warning sign for people is the gut health distress. And then the other things are potential hair loss, like hair loss that's happening that shouldn't be happening. I know that we're supposed to lose a lot of hair every day, but when you're pulling clumps of hair out of your head, or you're seeing it's clogging your drain, for instance, or you're seeing it all over your bathroom floor, that's definitely a sign that something's going on. And then acne is another big sign as well. So if you have cystic acne, if you have it on your jawline or on your chin, that's usually a sign as well that there is a hormonal imbalance, and other skin issues as well. Like I said, melasma, that happened to me. Usually that only happens during pregnancy to women, but it happened to me in my early 20s, which was completely traumatizing. So there's like a list of things, as well as weight gain that you can't really lose, exhaustion, getting a good night of sleep and then waking up in the morning and not being able to function properly, or not being able to go to bed at a decent hour or fall asleep easily. You wake up in the middle of the night. The list just sort of goes on, but those are some of the big signs that there's definitely an underlying hormonal imbalance.
You said so many great things. First of all, I love that you recognize the role of trauma, because we had Dr. Susan Blum on, and she talked about, people who have autoimmune conditions, which is always a gut issue. They score higher on the adverse childhood experiences. They've usually had some sort of traumatic experience. I know the work I do with clients on binging, overeating, all comes back to some sort of traumatic experience, that the pattern that created, they're still living in today unknowingly. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I know we'll we'll get into kind of the emotional issues that can come up, with your period that they can reveal as well. So I'm so glad that you bring that lens to it, because I don't think clients, I know I used to think like, oh, I'm mentally over something, but the body, who is it? Vanderkolk says the body keeps the score. And I just love that phrase. And a woman's fertility is so much about her cycles, being in touch with herself, that it's probably a big barometer for all of your health, just not your hormones.
It is. I mean, it's been recognized as the fifth vital sign, and in addition to the other four. So I think that that's amazing. It's been recognized as that. So I think that it's really important for us to start to really pay attention to what's going on with our periods. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I actually lost my period for 3 months back in July. I had tried intermittent fasting without doing too much research. I just didn't want to eat breakfast because I'm so lazy. And my husband does it, and my sister and her boyfriend do it. I'm like, I'm going to try it. And like, I lost my period. So I quit it. I stopped doing it immediately. And I went to see a naturopath because I also had kind of a sluggish thyroid, and I was feeling like I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. And she was like, okay, you losing your period is connected to adrenal fatigue. I was waking up in the middle of the night, but losing the period was the sign of like, okay, you're just depleted in so many other areas. And within a month of doing some detoxing and stuff that she gave me, no food changes because I eat pretty clean as it is, I got my period back for like 2 times in a row. And I'm like so grateful. And she's like, I was like, I never thought I'd be so grateful for it to come again. But it's totally made me fascinated about, I love thinking of this as like, it's your fifth vital sign,
Yeah. Isn't that incredible?
It's so incredible. And we don't learn about it. I have this theory that because all of our like sex organs are internal, like we don't think about them as much, versus like men have their penis just like hanging out. So they're constantly like thinking about it. And that is not scientifically sound, but
no, but I think that there's a lot of truth to that. There has to be.
Right. Like if we're gaining weight, we like think about it a lot because we can't like ignore it. But like our like, the whole reproductive system for women is so internal. So another thing that I just wanted to point out, because I had a client this year too, I asked her why she was put on birth control as a teenager, and it sent us down this rabbit hole and made all these connections of her health. She's like, you were the first person to ever ask me why I was put on it. And then she started disclosing that she was having painful sex. And then she did her own research, because once you like connect these dots for people, it's like, at least with my clients, they love to learn. Like they take it and run with it. But she has since gone off the pill, and like the painful sex has gone away. She's feeling more like stable. Her sleep is getting better. So all that stuff that you described, she didn't realize the pill was causing it. She thought it was supporting her. And so that brings me up the question, why do you think doctors think the birth control is this silver bullet to period issues, to skin issues? Like, I've never understood that.
Yeah, this is such a great question to ask. And I think that what we need to talk about is the fact that doctors aren't trained in anything else. I mean, there's a limitation to their knowledge. And I don't believe that in our society we have a real understanding of that. I think that there is a doctor God complex. And unfortunately, for so many women, we go to the doctor from when we're a little girl, for instance. I mean, this is everyone really, but women in particular, just because there's a lot of gender bias in medicine and whatnot. But we go to the doctor when we're a little girl, the doctor fixes us and they make us feel better. And that's basically the relationship that we start with, our doctor client or patient relationship. And so then as we get older, we continue to see the doctor and they continue to give us whatever medication is needed to make us feel better. But what happens is when hormonal imbalances arise and we start to feel symptoms, to me, that indicates that we're so far gone that we're going to need much bigger intervention than just some kind of medicine or Band-Aid fix. And so I think that when it comes to the doctors, they're just not trained in anything else. I mean, they've been told that the pill can do all of this stuff. And as far as I'm concerned, the pill does not fix anything. It's just masking these symptoms that we're experiencing. And what happens when we come off of it is that in most cases, these symptoms become exponentially worse. And it also triggers a whole other host of problems. The birth control pill, we can get into this, but it has a lot of effects on our bodies. And when we get onto the pill, when a doctor prescribes the pill for us, it's usually not with fully informed consent. And I think that that is a major problem because we're not totally told what it can do to us. And, the pill is this one size fits all jam. And as far as I'm concerned, that's modern medicine's biggest flaw. And so when we're put on this pill, we're not really told that it could potentially cause depression, but that's written on the pill insert. And we may have certain genetic predispositions to blood clots that we were not tested for. And so we go on the pill or we go on the NuvaRing, and then, you potentially develop a blood clot. I mean, there are hundreds of women and girls who have died from blood clots and they were not tested. I don't understand why we can't just do that simple test to find out. And then that's not a suitable birth control option for you. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I think it's just medicine's limitations and the fact that doctors are not taught any other options for all of these myriad women's health related issues.
And so that tells me two things. First of all, if they're not taught, they're probably also not taught the root cause, right? Because if you're taught that this is the answer, no one's understanding the root cause, which is so important. And I also like that you talked about it's not fully informed consent, because in my work and on this podcast, I'm always using the word agency. And what that means is independent choice. And so I'm really agnostic about if people want to use the pill, if they want to use medicine. A lot of my clients end up getting off of it through their own, once they're fully informed of the effects. But that's my whole flag I want to fly is independent choice. But if you don't know the true costs and benefits of all your choices or what your choices even are, it's not agency. It's less informed. I liked how you said it.
I just said it's not fully informed consent.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, so that brings up the question of what does the pill or the NuvaRing in effect actually do? Because sometimes I'll hear from clients or from people I'm just on a really low dose, or it's not this kind. And so I'm like, oh my God, there's so many different pills. There's so many different choices. They're all doing different things. What does it actually do?
Oh, I love this so much. So I think what we don't realize is that it doesn't really fix anything, right? Because that's the problem, is that so many women are going on the pill or some other birth control to fix another issue. But ultimately, the pill, the NuvaRing, even the Mirena, which is the hormonal IUD. So these are all stopping ovulation from happening. And what they're doing is they're stopping ovulation by replacing your own endogenous hormones with synthetic hormones. So the pill, for instance, so it's usually has estrogen, so synthetic estrogen, which is a lot stronger than our actual estrogen. So that's another issue in and of itself. So that estrogen is going to tell your brain that it doesn't need to trigger ovulation anymore, because your brain's like, oh, there's enough estrogen in the body, so I don't need to do my job. So it, in essence, shuts down the conversation happening between your hypothalamus and your pituitary and your ovaries. And when that conversation is shut down for long periods of time, it can be potentially problematic to get that going again. Anyway, so the body has this synthetic estrogen in it. The combined pill will have some progestin in it. And so progestin is synthetic progesterone, artificial progesterone, not to be confused with the real progesterone, because that's a whole other story. Anyway, so what happens is the body stops ovulating. We have this synthetic estrogen and these progestins in our bodies, and that is just what continues to circulate throughout our body for the whole month. And then we take these sugar pills and we get what is known as a pill bleed. So this is not a real period. So everyone, if you're on the pill, this is not a real period. And the reason it's not a real period is because you're not ovulating. So the only way to have a real period is if you're actually ovulating every month, or, whenever you ovulate. It could be every other month. And so what happens is, for so many women, they think that everything is working properly because every 28 days they get a period. And then they take the pills again, and every 28 days later, they get another period. So that's really what it's doing in effect.
I had another client I'm thinking of. She actually was on the pill and stopped getting even the fake period.
Yeah, that happens a lot too. And the reason is, so you mentioned the low dose estrogen or the low dose birth control pill. So a lot of women say, well, I'm on a really low dose. And so there's this myth that a low dose pill is better. And here's why it's not, for a couple of different reasons. The first is that your body might need more estrogen than that pill is delivering in order to build a uterine lining. And so if your body is not getting enough of the estrogen, even the fake estrogen, you will lose a period completely. So you will stop bleeding completely, which is a huge sign, as you said earlier, that there's something seriously wrong and you need to look deeper to figure out what that is. So that's, to me, is a fundamental problem. And the second thing is that you mentioned, well, we're talking about painful sex and low sex drive. And so what happens on the pill is that it causes the liver to make a protein called sex hormone binding globulin. And so this binds to testosterone, it makes it inactive. And when SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, goes up in the body, it lowers free testosterone. So that's where it's causing painful sex, because testosterone and estrogen are both necessary for vaginal lubrication, vaginal elasticity. Otherwise, your vaginal tissue can atrophy because it's so dependent on estrogen and testosterone. So this is not good for your vaginal tissue. It's not good for your sex drive. It's not good for your sex life. And what happens is, unfortunately, in some instances, the SHBG levels, they go up, they get so high that when you come off the pill, it takes a really long time for them to go down. And in some cases, it does not go down at all. This is hugely problematic for a lot of women because they may never reclaim their libido.
Wow. I know certain people who are invested in that.
Yes, exactly.
It's so funny. I say that this regime, and I call it a regime because that's how Reuters is covering it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But the things that they're bringing up are just this like shadow side of things. Like, you know, it's bringing sexual harassment and the Me Too movement back up. And this thing about not covering birth control, I know that it was struck down, but I was like, this could be, if we could have a really intelligent conversation about this is actually a really important thing to talk about. Like, does birth, and I know that brings in very difficult, like socioeconomic issues and who has access to care and who has, you know, it opens up this whole minefield. But I think this conversation on birth control just needs to be more deep, like what you're saying. It's huge implications.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. I could not agree with you more. I mean, there's a lot of science behind this too. I mean, I even have some notes here on this, on studies that were done on women using the pill. They're at an increased risk for sexual disorder compared to those on non-hormonal or no birth control at all. It's something like 32% more likely to experience female sexual dysfunction, orgasm disorders. I mean, it's nuts. And then the whole other list of, you know, suppressed women initiating sex or just complete loss of interest in sex. Like, I actually wrote an article about that. And my first line was, would you rather be gardening than having sex? And like pretty much everyone responded in the comments, like, yeah, actually I would. I'd rather be looking at Facebook. So we have a serious problem on our hands when we think about the millions upon millions of women who are taking hormonal birth control or have done so at some point.
When I think about, you know, I always look at metaphor and how the period is such a metaphor for our creative cycle of what I call the spring and summer season of your cycle, which we'll go into about food tweaks in a second here, or after we get to some root causes. But, you know, that's like when you're out in the world and you're deciding, and then you have the fall season where you're discerning, and then winter is what are you cutting away? And I think that's such a metaphor for how women feel depleted, like from a creative life force, which is like, some people think it was like a motivation or life out of alignment, but it's this like creative depletion on so many levels, and the birth control pill may be contributing to that rather than being this tool of liberation, which is what it was thought to be when it first came out. And I don't know if you know this, but from a historical perspective, the pill was one of the reason that people had trouble adopting it at first was because it was the first type of pharmaceutical that you would have to take every day. And people couldn't wrap their heads around having to take a pill every day. And so I feel like the pill also ushered in this collective mentality of like, oh, of course I'll take a pill every day for other things too. I mean, it was like a big barrier breaker.
Yes, I was aware. And I think that, yeah, it's a crazy, isn't it? Because now we live in the complete opposite where it's the norm to take multiple pills every day. And this is just okay. And nobody's questioning that. And that to me is, there's something seriously wrong there.
Yeah. So I want to talk about, a lot of our listeners are like approaching menopause or in perimenopause and afterwards. And I'm imagining the effects of the pill. And we're going to talk about how to detox from it. But that can affect you even when you're not when you've been through menopause.
Yes. So the question is, you're asking if the pill use can affect you if you've used it from like in the 20s and 30s and it affects you in menopause?
Yeah. And also, how important is it to still care about, because you still have a cycle, even if you're not bleeding, I'm assuming. Like you still have hormonal changes. You may not bleed, but assuming there's still hormonal fluctuations, they may be less. I could be wrong. I don't know. You're the period girl. Tell me.
Yes, there are some hormonal fluctuations, but they're definitely different in menopause. I assume you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And what happens when your ovaries shut down in menopause, your adrenal glands take over for sex hormone production. And so that's where you have to be so careful about preserving your adrenal bandwidth, because you don't want to go into menopause with completely fried adrenals, because they're supposed to take over. And if they don't take over, you end up just crashing really hard in menopause. And so I've seen that happen to a lot of women as well. So it's really, really important to be cognizant of the fact that your adrenals are going to start producing, well, they already do produce a little bit of estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. But if they are under significant stress for a long period of time, what's going to happen is they're not going to function optimally into menopause. And so you're going to have a situation where you're not producing any hormones at all, and you basically want to jump off a bridge. I mean, I'm joking, obviously, but yeah.
Well, but I've also told my clients, like American women have like one of the roughest passages of menopause because their adrenals are so fried. Whereas in other countries, granted, our lifestyle and food are being exported, but this idea that menopause is this, again, big, horrible thing that happens is totally overinflated and exaggerated because of how we support our whole body system, I think, leading up to it.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I think so as well. In fact, I did a talk earlier this year, and I started the conversation with a story about my sister's ex-boyfriend. Actually, his family had decided they were done with the rat race living many, many years ago and moved to this really small town in Alaska. I mean, it wasn't even really a town. It's out. They just sort of created a settlement, so to speak, with some friends and family, and almost like a commune, I suppose you could say. And he and I used to talk a lot about women's health issues and whatnot, because they're very into health. They are a macrobiotic community. And yeah, it was really a cool experience conversating with him. But he basically was like, women in our society, they don't really have any period problems. They're all really fertile. There's no fertility issues. And menopause is a total non-event. I was like, wait, what? So we had a whole conversation about that repeatedly, because I was just in awe of the fact that these women did not experience anything that mainstream women experience. And so there's really something to be said for that.
Yeah, we got to rethink everything.
Mm-hmm. I know, no big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like, if you're a creative type, it's a great time to be alive because everything's broken.
No kidding. That's a fact.
So whether people are on the pill or off the pill, I want to talk about some root cause of period issues, because one of the things that I see that I don't think clients understand when often clients want to lose weight, which is why they're coming to me. And even though I say that my methodology it doesn't promise weight loss, it can be a side effect of healing your physiology and the emotional things that are running your life. However, one of the things that's really challenging, I think, when people want to do things, quote unquote, a more holistic and get to root cause, is a lot of my clients, have this HPA access to stress, which we've talked about here on Insatiable before, but I think it's worth bringing up again. I've kind of equate it to this like invisible imaginary process that registers like all the stress in your body.
Yes.
Like emotionally and physically. It's kind of like an internet that registers that. I don't know, not an internet, but just like a bank, let's put it that way. And I know that the restriction binge cycle really stresses that as well. And so it takes some time of like getting your body to normalize that, hey, you're not going to be restricting, you're not going to be binging, maybe overeating, but you're not going to restrict again. And that takes some time to heal. And I've heard you discuss that that's actually the HPA access stress is also a root cause issue of period issues.
Definitely. Yes, it really is. And so I think that there's such a huge connection between stress, whether that's emotional, mental, physical stress, internal stress, and what's going on with our menstrual cycles. And with the HPA axis, I think a better way to look at it is the HPA axis is also connected to the thyroid and the gonads. And so the HPA-TG, which is so HP, hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal, thyroid, gonadal axis, which is a huge mouthful and something no one should ever really have to remember. But I mean, it's ridiculous.
Sexy terms, Nicole.
Yeah, I know, girl, I try. But I really think that it's so important for us to understand, again, that this is like the hormone superhighway, right? So everything is talking to everything. And I like to think of it as a highway where the speed limit should be about 75 to 80 and everything should be going as around that speed. Anyway, if there's a car accident or if there is slowdown or whatever, it's going to impact every single vehicle on that highway. And so your hormones are the ones traveling on that highway. They're being sent from gland to gland and they're talking to each other all day long. So if there's a problem, for instance, you are chronically stressed or there's trauma or, you have an acute situation happen where maybe you lose a loved one or maybe not something even that serious or you lose your job. These are all things that basically hijack your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So your brain has been hijacked. The problem is that your brain is where the hypothalamus and the pituitary are. And so I think of them as the conductor and the orchestra. And so if your hypothalamus has been completely taken over by the insane stress in your life, then it's not going to talk to your pituitary the way it's supposed to. And then your pituitary is going to send all these crazy signals to your adrenals and your thyroid and your ovaries in women, testes in men. And so then you end up in a situation where you're having all these symptoms that seem completely unrelated to the stress in your life. And you're like, what is happening to me right now? And so I think it comes back to that. And so when I mention the different types of stress, I'm talking about the mental stress. So we're talking about your job or, something going on with your career or whatever. And then we've got the emotional stuff, and that could be related to your relationship, or maybe you're having a situation with a toxic friend or something along those lines. And then, there's the physical stress, and that could be living in a polluted environment or drinking polluted water, for instance. And then we have, that internal stress, and that usually is inflammation or food sensitivities that are triggering blood sugar imbalances. And so there's all of these different categories of stress. And I feel like I'm stressing people out just talking about all the different kinds of stress. But I think it's important to know.
It is. And I think I'm glad that you're bringing that up, because to me, a lot of times my clients will be like, but I'm not doing anything more than anyone else. And it's it's the death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? There's something somatic happening to me. Or some of my clients who struggle with their periods, the stress, and actually even me losing my period was a result of the previous 8 years. I'm not stressed right now, but It was just the accumulation of what I willingly put myself through. But some of my clients who have the period struggles, it's after just years of just running themselves into the ground.
Oh my gosh, I could not agree with you more. I mean, because we forget how resilient our bodies are, right? We forget that they can take a whole lot of beating before they're like, okay, sister, I'm done with you now. You need to make some changes. And we are programmed in our society to ignore these small symptoms, right? So yeah, okay, you skipped a period, no big deal. Or, I have these headaches that happen every single time I'm getting my period, or twice a month, and they're pretty bad. Or, I have some acne and whatever, it's not that big of a deal. But these are all signs from our bodies. We forget that our bodies are talking to us at all times and trying to communicate in their own language, not in English, or the language that we speak. And what happens is we ignore these signs because we're just never told to tune in. We're so disconnected.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because again, we start to not pay attention until it's an extreme case, and then it's going to take a little bit more time. It's still possible. I love that you brought up that our body is resilient.
Yes. We're in allopathic medicine too. I mean, again, we're never told that these signs are anything to pay attention to. You've probably been to a doctor and they look at your test results and they're like, oh, everything's totally fine. You're normal, even though you feel terrible. And I think that that is a perfect example for many of us that this is how we operate in the day to day.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to move over onto food changes because I think what you're describing is this overall picture of is our fertility, our periods, they are this fifth vital sign. And I think, a lot of my clients often, some are done having kids, but they want to get pregnant and you need time to prepare your body, whether it's healing, preparing for fertility, like this stuff takes time. So I would love, our audience is pretty versed on whole foods diet, healthy fats, always can use a refresher, but we've done some episodes on that. So I'd love if you can share with us how our nutrition changes as our cycle changes and some tweaks that people can do to start supporting themselves, whether they're on the pill or not on the pill.
Yeah, I love that. I think that we have to always keep in mind that we're so different to men. Obviously, we have very different hormones. We make babies. We have a different hormone cycle because it's based on a monthly rhythm, whereas a man's is dictated by a daily rhythm. And, we definitely have a different mindset and approach to life and different metabolisms. And so, of course, all of this is dictated by what happens during our monthly menstrual cycle. So it's really crucial that we eat and we exercise, and at least we try and live according to our cyclical female rhythms. And so you mentioned the different seasons of our cycles, and I'll use the technical terms and equate them to the seasons as well, if that's cool with you.
Oh, no, I would love that. I love that.
Okay.
Technical terms, but I can only remember them by the seasons because you've got the best words, Nicole.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I've worked so hard to memorize all of them.
You also have good metaphors. I love the highway and all that stuff. So excellent.
Awesome. I know. I love the metaphors and analogies too. I'm all about that because otherwise it's really difficult to remember this stuff. It's a lot of big words, as you said. So this first phase of your cycle is considered the follicular phase. And as you mentioned, it's also considered the winter. And so that's the day one of your cycle. And day one of your period. And that is menstruation, obviously the bleeding phase, as we call it, winter phase. And what's happening there is that our hormones are at their lowest at this time of the cycle. So everyone is not doing a whole lot going on right now. We've just got the period happening. And I feel like our periods have sort of been built up as the thing that you have to think about in your cycle. But what really needs to be thought more about is ovulation. Because if you're not ovulating, your body is not making crucial hormones that you need to support your physical and your emotional health. So it's really critical for us to start to think about, are we ovulating rather than what's happening with our period? Although that's good too. We need to know what's happening with our period, but ovulation is key. So anyway, the follicular phase is that first half of your cycle. So it spans from that day one of your period all the way to ovulation. And it's actually divided into two. There's menstruating or the winter season and non-menstruating, and that is more of the spring season. And so we move into the spring after we finish our period, and then our bodies are doing this thing where they're building up to get an egg released for ovulation. It's also known as the proliferative phase, which I think is so funny because I'm like, yes, spring, proliferation. All these new things are happening. Leaves are growing.
Everywhere.
Exactly, right? Yes, exactly. Proliferation, lots of babies. So anyway, what happens there is that our body now is making all of these hormones to prep us for ovulation, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the big thing that's happening in our cycle. And what I think is so interesting about this time of our cycle when it comes to what food we should be focusing on is that there is evidence that suggests that our insulin sensitivity, so this is how sensitive our body is to insulin, which is the blood sugar hormone, the insulin sensitivity in our bodies is higher in the follicular phase. And then it decreases in that luteal phase of our menstrual cycle, which is the second half we'll talk about. So this means that our bodies are more prone to blood sugar and insulin imbalances in that second half of our cycle, but we'll get into that. But basically in the first half, we're not as sensitive. So it's easier for our bodies to manage higher sugar intake if that's what happens. We can eat more carbohydrates and likely not have a spike in our blood sugar or any kind of blood sugar imbalances, and our moods tend to stay more stable. And so that's all due to estrogen. So that's what estrogen does, which is pretty awesome. And then as we move into ovulation, our bodies are, like just going crazy. We've got estrogen at its peak. We've got testosterone at its peak. Ovulation is known as the summer season. And so summertime, as you can imagine, there's a lot of activity, lots of bustling around. And then we move from the ovulation phase into the luteal phase. And so this is now the fall. And so the first half of the luteal phase is very similar to ovulation, the summer. Things are still busy. Estrogen and testosterone are ramping down. And then progesterone takes over. And so progesterone is a hormone that I call it like keep calm and carry on hormone, because it really does help to keep us calmer and more chilled out during that second half of our cycle, leading into that PMS time, which is, like the worst time for so many women who have hormonal imbalances. And so what's really cool, or well, not so cool, is that we have more insulin issues in that second half of our cycle. And the reason for that is progesterone actually pushes our blood sugar down lower than estrogen might. And so we may have these bigger swings if we tend to eat sugar. So we need to be really careful in that second half of our cycle with how many carbohydrates we're having, how much sugar we're having, how much alcohol we're having, how much stress is in our life, because stress raises your blood sugar. So you have to be really careful with that. Think about what techniques you can incorporate into your life to mitigate the effects of stress. So it's really, really interesting because our whole cycle is defined by our sex hormones. And not only that, like how we're going to navigate our cycle as well. And when it comes to the food side of things, so coming back to the follicular phase, I think it's really helpful to eat foods that are going to help support estrogen production as it's ramping up. So things like pumpkin and flax seeds, which are part of a seed cycling protocol, they will help build estrogen. And then we've got pomegranates and sprouted beans and healthy fats like avocados and coconut oil and butter and coconut oil and coconut butter, grass-fed butter, things like that. And then into the ovulatory phase, when we have estrogen rising significantly, it's helpful to eat foods that are going to support your liver. So your liver is responsible for detoxing potentially harmful estrogens. So all the cruciferous veggies like Brussels sprouts and kale and cabbage and turnips and broccoli, they're all really excellent choices for this time of the cycle. And then for that luteal phase, like I was just talking about, like I said, progesterone can impair insulin sensitivity. So we just have to be really careful about blood sugar regulation at that time of our cycles. And what's really frustrating, I think, for a lot of women is, unfortunately, too little progesterone can cause this problem, but having too much progesterone can also cause that problem. So we really need to figure out a Goldilocks amount of progesterone for each human being. I mean, because we're all different. And that's why, when you're on the pill, it's that one size fits all, which doesn't work because we're so unique. And so in that second half of your cycle, you really want to think about supporting progesterone production, because progesterone does tend to be low for many women. So foods that are high in vitamin C, like peppers and oranges and grapefruit, as well as foods that are high in the B vitamins, B6 in particular, bananas, walnuts, salmon. These are all helpful for boosting progesterone levels. And then nutrients like zinc and magnesium, they will support progesterone production as well. And I think that it's always really important to think about keeping your blood sugar as stable as possible during this phase so that progesterone doesn't cause your blood sugar to dip lower than what's normal. And this, I think actually would explain why a lot of women have these emotional PMS symptoms, like the moodiness and the anxiety, and I guess like anger. You could say a lot of women have anger issues during this time, or they're very snappy. It usually looks very similar to blood sugar imbalances. Like when your blood sugar crashes, you get pissy and you get annoyed. So it's very similar in the sense that the symptoms are almost identical. And then going into the menstrual phase, or, going back into your period. So you're leaving the fall season, you're going back into winter now. It's helpful, again, to think about not creating additional stress on your body while it works to release the uterine lining, because that in and of itself is kind of a big deal. And so the body loses key nutrients during menstruation. So you really want to think about mineral rich foods, bone broth, vitamin-rich smoothies. I also think about soups and stews that help to replenish any kind of lost iron or mineral stores. And then, of course, iron-rich foods like liver, other animal protein, beans, leafy green vegetables. All of these, of course, are high in the B vitamins, which are going to support energy levels during this time as well. So there are a lot of different things people can do. Hopefully that's helpful.
It is. And I think one of the big things is during the quote PMS time and the period time that people can do is sleep more, like slow down.
Yes.
I mean, that goes so much further than like, a rose hip supplement or something, which we can talk about. I love your term supplement graveyard, but I think slowing down and even adjusting your exercise. I know that's been huge for me to exercise.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I am exercise, I'm more consistent, but like doing things that are actually going to harmonize my hormones versus doing all this intense stuff while you have your period just sets you up for depletion and then being hungrier. So I think those are some things that people can also do that can help in addition to the food as well.
I'm so glad you said that. Actually, the sleep, it's so critical. This is the time to optimize sleep for sure. There's so many studies that show sleeping that less than 5 hours a night significantly increases body weight, because it basically makes you almost insulin resistant the next day. So you don't sleep well, and then the next day you eat a bagel for breakfast, and it's going to have an even bigger impact on your blood sugar balance than if you just had a regular breakfast, or if you were in your follicular phase, for instance. So it's really important for us to keep that in mind too, that sleep is so critical to maintaining our hormone function. And melatonin actually is needed by our ovaries. So if our melatonin levels are completely off, it can cause ovarian function problems or ovarian dysfunction. In fact, women who are shift workers who work at night have significantly increased ovarian dysfunction than women who get sleep every single night consistently. It's amazing.
There's so much that goes into it. Truth with Food, in essence, is a framework for teaching people what works best for their body. And I think it's so important for people to know that, because what you're bringing up is so key, is that there's all these different inputs and the body is so dynamic. And based on our cycles, like you have to have context for how to make shifts and changes. And I think one of the things I know was my clients this year, a lot have gone off the pill. They can't believe how much more in tune they are with their emotions, which also signal like that their cycle is changing for them as well. So I want to talk about that. But first I want to go into this idea of what you called the supplement graveyard, which I love, is that like we need to do these bigger things like sleep, like adjusting our diets, slowing down with exercise during this time, pushing ourselves more during the spring, summer phase. But I would love, because you have a big background in functional medicine, as I do, although one of my kind of criticisms of functional medicine is that some practitioners are just kind of recreating the Western medicine model by just giving people all these supplements, rather than like doing the harder work of getting people to eat well most of the time. So what are your thoughts on supplements in terms of hormonal support?
I think that there's, of course, a place for them, but I really think less is more when it comes to supplements. So when I talk about this supplement graveyard, I joke about it because it really is a thing. Every single woman I talk to says they've got some sort of drawer full or cupboard full of supplements in their kitchen or pantry. And it's such a huge bummer, because they'll come to me and they'll say, well, I've already spent like $500 to $1,000 on supplements, and I got them from a naturopath or a functional medicine doctor. And this isn't to say that naturopaths and functional medicine doctors don't know what they're doing by any means, but this is what keeps happening. At least this is the trend I see. And they're so frustrated because they don't really know what's working, and they don't know what to take anymore because they feel like they don't know what's working and they are just confused and concerned. And I totally get all of these feelings. So I just think that ultimately, if you can start with like 2 to 3 supplements at a time, that would be the place to start, because you don't really need more than that. And then you can kind of layer on top of those supplements. So I'm always talking about, like a B complex, a magnesium, and maybe some kind of like fish oil or cod liver oil. Like those 3 things could help so much. And then you would be able to start to see, like, okay, this is actually working. These are the symptoms that feel like they've been resolved. These are the effects that I'm feeling. And you can really pinpoint what's changed and then add in more depending on your specific condition. For instance, if you have PCOS, you would really want to think about some kind of blood sugar balancing. So you'd really want to look at vitamin D levels and then maybe supplement accordingly. You'd want to look at curcumin, or you'd want to look at like chromium or berberine for, blood sugar stability if that's what is causing your PCOS. So there are a lot of different conditions that are related to our menstrual cycle that we can add in extra supplements for. But I think having a base supplement regimen is so crucial, and we don't need to be taking like 20 supplements. But I'm sure you know this too. You've seen it and heard it. I've had women come to me and they're taking like 18 supplements a day, and they're like, I don't know what to do, and I don't know if this is even having an impact, and is it affecting my liver? I mean, there's so many concerns with that.
Yeah, I'm not a big supplement person. I mean, yes, I know people need certain things, but yeah, like you, I just think for the most part, I'm just such a big believer if you can do the basic things, and I know that takes time, that's where your money and energy is better well spent. However, I agree with you. Like the supplement is just to help you kind of when you're really imbalanced, and over time, you shouldn't really need it if you're fixing the imbalance. Now, granted, that can be different. Like you said, vitamin D we're barely out in the sun. So we do have to also consider how far away we are from how we're supposed to be living.
Yeah, there's that. That's a good point. That's why I said, getting your vitamin D levels tested, which, again, I think is another issue, is that we're not testing to see what's going on. I'm a big fan of test, don't guess, because, and while testing also is a bit of a rabbit hole as well, I think that there are basic tests that we can do just to determine our baselines to see what we really need to add in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, have an accurate measure. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you kind of like 3 questions I want you to answer, because I know that we have only like 10 minutes left, even though I can do forever. First of all, if people do decide to go off the pill because they realize they don't want to mask symptoms, or it's causing more problems than it's worth, I'm curious about how people can detox the pill out of them, which they may need to use supplements, some of the nutritional deficiencies that you have to build back up after the pill. And I want to talk to you about this amazing concept that happens with some women, that they aren't attracted to their partners or the same people after going off the pill. I know that's a lot.
Yes. You might have to repeat those questions.
Yeah, totally. And I'm just like, we have to get these answered. I'm so fascinated.
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So question number 1 was,
if people are detoxing off the pill, like what, I sometimes for clients recommend DIM to get that out. But are there obviously liver support? And like, do the lemon water, lots of greens, but what you recommend for people who want to get the pill out of them once they go off the pill, because the synthetic hormones are still in you, and how long can people expect for them to be in them?
Doctors basically say that the synthetic hormones are gone pretty fast. I'm not so sure about that. I mean, if they are, then the side effects are what I see as long lasting, and that's what's so troubling. So for women who have been on the pill or some other form of hormonal birth control, you can really expect that for every year that you've been on it to have about 1 to 2 months of recovery. So women who've been on the pill for like 15 years, you're looking at like a 1.5 to 2 years of recovery. And I mean, that's not the case for everyone, but I really try to set a realistic expectation of, what they can expect to experience, because there's just no one size fits all approach to how to get off the pill. I mean, just like there's no one size fits all approach to how to fix our hormones, because we're all so uniquely built, and we don't take into account our lifestyle, our current diet, what supplements we have or have not taken. We also don't take into account our really unique genetics. And there's so much research now that is emerging on genetics and how our genes impact us. Like I said, that blood clot gene, for instance, if you're genetically predisposed to blood clots, you definitely don't want to be taking the birth control pill, and you should absolutely be off of it if you do have that. So there are so many others, of course, that can affect us. So I think that that's like the most important thing for us to remember. And so when it comes to what we can do, I think that what we should do before we come off of the pill is start to change our diet. So we really have to focus on that. Like, and your audience is well aware of the nutrients and things like that they need, but we really have to think about getting our blood sugar stable. So really making sure that we're eating complex carbs, protein, fat, lots of fiber in our diet, because that will help to move all of these excess hormones or hormone metabolites out of our bodies. What I think a lot of people don't realize is that this is a multi-step system. So when we have synthetic estrogen and synthetic progestins in our bodies, or any hormones really, even the endogenous hormones, they go through the liver. There's phase 1, and then there's phase 2 of liver detoxification, and then they're transported into our digestive tract, and they're released through our colon and our stool, and in some cases released in our urine. So we really have to make sure that all of those systems are working well. And unfortunately for so many women, they're constipated chronically because they've been on the pill for a long time, or they've had some other kind of digestive issue happening that's caused chronic constipation. And so when the transit time is slow, these hormones can actually be released from our colon back into circulation. But at that point, they're hormone metabolites. And so in some instances, the metabolites are even stronger than the hormone itself, which can be really problematic. So we really have to focus on making sure that our liver is supported. So you mentioned the warm lemon water. Of course, that's a big one to start your day out. You really want to support your liver function, like with all the cruciferous vegetables that I was talking about. I'm a big fan of SGS and DIM. So the combination of the two, SGS supports a phase 2 of our liver detoxification. And so phase 2 has a number of different pathways. And that's where there tends to be a bit of a roadblock. Like phase 1 only has that one pathway, and everything goes through there really fast. But what happens is the breakdown metabolites between phase 1 and phase 2 can be really harmful. And so if there's a backlog in phase 2, those metabolites get recirculated as well. And so that can be really problematic for us in the long term. So we really need to focus on phase 2 in most cases. So you want to use SGS, which is sulforaphane glucosinolate. I can never say those words right, but that's what you'd want to use to support phase 2. And again, lots of cruciferous veggies. That's one way. And then DIM is very similar, but that's more of a support for phase 1. And so if you're not getting the results you are looking for after using something like SGS, then you would do DIM. And this is all written on a blog post, by the way, on my website. So if anyone is curious, they can read about it there.
And we'll put it in the show notes as well as a link to your site, because she has so many great articles. You can tell she's I love that you're research-based and clear and technical.
Yeah, I really feel that I need to be, because people are asking these questions, and you can't just throw random information out there. So I'm all about the science, but also trying to explain it as easily as possible. So anyway, that's what's happening there with your liver. So you really want to be able to support that, and other antioxidants too. There's like vitamin E and vitamin C. And of course, vitamin A is also critical as well. So we're wanting to think about our liver function. We're also wanting to think about our gut health. So if you are having gut health issues, you really have to think about how you can support your gut. So one of the biggest complaints for lots of women is low stomach acid. So symptoms of low stomach acid. So you want to start from the top down. You want to chew your food properly. You want to make sure that your stomach acid is at the level it needs to be at. You also want to think about what's going on with your digestive enzymes, and of course your gut bacteria, so your microbiome. And there's lots of talk on the microbiome. There's no shortage of information out there on that. And there are a bazillion different probiotics on the market too. I'm a big fan of Megaspore probiotics. They're amazing, and I've had really great results for myself and for others. So that's an option too. But in addition to that, you can think about food that is fermented and is rich in natural bacteria. So sauerkraut and kimchi, those are some of my faves as well. So we really want to just think about how we can support our bodies nutritionally and then supplement accordingly based on, what the deficiencies are that are happening.
Love it. Love it. So you answered the first two. So
yeah. Oh, I did. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Talk about this side effect of women not being attracted to their partners after going off the pill.
Oh, girl, I know. So this was a study done in the 2000s, early 2000s, and they call it the T-shirt study, because women basically had to smell a T-shirt that a man had worn for a couple of nights. And so what happens is essentially human beings, generally speaking, as a way of continuing our species, are typically attracted to other humans who are not genetically the same. And it all comes down to pheromones and our smell and these things that we don't even know are happening. But what happened in the study is that they had women smell a T-shirt belonging to their partner. Well, actually, I should go back a little bit. So basically, when a man, like hidden in a man's pheromones or his smell, are clues about his genetic makeup. And so this plays a really important role in our immune system function, our resilience. And so women are, like I said, attracted to somebody who is opposite to them. And so this study suggested that, females prefer the scent of males whose genes are different to their own. And that was basically so our offspring could survive. So couples with different genes are less likely to be related to each other, that kind of thing.
And nature loves diversity.
It sure does. Absolutely. So there's that whole thing. Anyway, so what happened is these women on the pill, they undergo this shift in preference towards the men who have these similar genes. And so they end up wanting to be with guys who have the same genes as them. Not good. And so when they come off of the pill, what happens is they suddenly realize that this is not the partner for them. I've had multiple men reach out to me and tell me that this has happened to them. And it's just so shocking because you really don't even believe it. And I've had women say to me, this is insane. I can't believe you've even written something like this. How dare you? I mean, people get really, really upset about it.
Oh my God, who knew your role was so controversial?
Oh my gosh, Allie, if you only knew the things that people write me, people get pissed. I am very confronting, apparently. But yeah, so they say they don't really know why the pill does this, like why it would affect attraction. But, it's again, like the pill tricks your body into thinking you're pregnant, right? So it's like it's mimicking pregnancy. And so it potentially draws a woman into or to a person who is more nurturing, like a relative or a caretaker. And so when they get off this pill, they're suddenly like, oh yeah, no, I actually really don't want that. I really want someone I'm super attracted to. And so it changes dramatically. I had a guy reach out to me a couple years ago and he was engaged and his girlfriend came off the pill because they were going to get married and try to get pregnant pretty soon afterwards. And leading up to their wedding, she was calling off the wedding because she didn't want to be with him anymore. And I've had other women say to me that they can't even stand the smell of their boyfriend or husband anymore. It's nuts. Yes. Yeah.
So
something to it.
So apparently it's not about if your horoscope signs match up, but just get off the pill and you'll know. Right?
Exactly.
Oh my God. This is so fascinating, Nicole. I know we have to wrap up. I have two last questions. What is the radical truth of your work? And what is your personal radical truth?
That's a long one. Okay.
We'll answer whichever one you want to answer.
Yes. I think, I just want to say that I'm a total rule breaker. I don't even know how to follow the rules. I really believe in my radical truth is that well-behaved women rarely ever make history. I love that quote so much.
I love it too.
I just really believe that the biggest untruth being perpetuated on women is that our menstrual issues are unfixable. This is false. I don't believe we need a great deal of medical intervention to be healthy. And we certainly don't need to medicate our cycles for our entire lives with all these forms of hormonal birth control and other medications. And I fundamentally believe that women want to know why their bodies are rebelling against them. And they have a deep desire to understand how their hormones work so that they can make changes from a place of informed consent. And so that is my core belief and core truth. And I want to teach women around the world that they can be empowered in understanding how their bodies function and they don't need to be controlled by whether it's some kind of medication or a birth control pill.
I love that. I joke my clients are sage rebels. Like they are rebelling in the wisest way as possible.
I love that, right? I know. I feel like we're really fiercely dedicated to empowering women that doesn't matter. You can take back control of your health. It doesn't matter what you've been through. You can rewrite the story.
Oh, yeah. And it's the biggest act of political resistance because like once you have agency over your body, it makes you unlearn a lot of other myths that you've been living by. And people who want to keep you down don't want that.
Right? I know. It's time to stop giving your power away and become your own health advocate for sure.
Yes, yes. Well, Nicole, where can people find you? I know, like, I will post that blog post that you mentioned on our show notes, but I know my audience is going to love you and want to know where they can find more of you.
Thanks. Yes, I am at NicoleJardim.com, and you can find all my blogs, everything on there. And you can also find me on Facebook and Instagram and on Twitter. My username for all three of those is Nicole M, like Madeleine, Jardim. So yeah, I can't wait to meet all of your peeps.
Yeah, they're awesome. Thank you so much for your time. This has been a blast.
Thank you. It has been amazing.
Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.